We made a game where you can click the animal, then buy new animals, and also you can merge them together. But if you reload the page, you will lose all the progress. In the previous video, we learned about JSON and how to store our data in the browser. Now let's use this knowledge for implementing save load and reset buttons. So at first, in our HTML, where you see the div with the ID grid, let's remove all these manually created divs. You will not see any changes on this board, just we created them to better understand which divs we need to generate with JavaScript. And now let's go to our script.js file. As I said before, if we want to store the state of our game, we need to store the game data. Actually, we will store only these variables because our array pets is a constant, so user can't change it. So let's go through each section and let's think how to write the function for saving our data. I don't think that we need to add something to the game data. So let's go to the next section. Then I see HTML elements section. So here we access our HTML elements. Let's access our save button. Now I need to pass the ID of the save button HTML element. In the index.html file, I can find the button element with the ID save button. So let's copy this ID and now let's pass it into our function. So the next section is helpers. Currently I don't think that we will write any helpers. So let's go to the next section, core actions. And here in the end of this section, so before the rendering section, let's add a new function save. So this function will save all our game data in the local storage of our browser. In the local storage, we store JSON files which are converted into the strings. The JSON has the same format as JavaScript objects, so let's convert all our game data into the object. I create an empty object data, and now I need to write all these variables inside of this object. I put quotes before each key, even though that this is not mandatory in JavaScript. I put it so we can understand that this is the name of our key and this is the variable, so the data that we store inside of this key. So actually this is what we will store. So this is an array with a lot of nulls, or sometimes we have objects of our pets. So after we converted it into the object, let's convert it into the JSON string. For that, I create a new variable data.json, and now I can use the json.stringify method where I need to pass our data. So this function just converts our object into the string so we can store it inside of our local storage, and then we can easily convert it back with the json.parse function. So now let's store it inside of the local storage. Here we see several methods and we will use setItem. So this function expects two parameters. The first is the key, how our saving will be called. And the second is the value, so what we actually save. So the key is just a string. So let's write something like merge pet key. Actually, I know that we will use the same key in the load function. So instead of copying and pasting it all the time, let's extract it into a separate constant. So inside of our game data, let's add a new constant saving key. So I write it with capital letters because the keyword const in JavaScript doesn't always mean that this is a constant variable. So for example, here we declared our board with the const keyword, but actually this const just prevents the container, which is array, to be changed, but the user can change the data inside of this container. So this is the reason why this is not a constant, but here we want to prevent any mutation of the saving key. So only the developer can change this string. And I extract it because when we change our string, all the remaining functions should work. So instead of passing the hard-coded string, we pass the variable. So instead of the merge pet key, let's use our variable. So now we need to write the second parameter, which is the data that we want to store. So this is very important to write data.json. If you pass the variable data instead of the data.json, you will store the result object. This is a useless result. Just you need to know that when you see it in the local storage, it means that you saved the object, not a string. So now this function saves our data inside of the local storage. And now let's show a message to our user that the game is saved. So we finished our save function, and now let's go to the next section. In the rendering section, we update our UI and board. So actually when we store our game, we don't want to update any UI elements. So it means that we can skip this section. And then we have the trigger section. So here we can write our trigger. So when the user clicks the button save, we will execute the save function. And now we can test how it works. So currently I have 1000 currency, and let's click the save button. Now you see the message that game is saved. So I can click OK, and now let's open our local storage and see what we have saved. For that, you need to inspect the page. And then on the right top side, you will find two arrows icon. So here you need to choose the application option. So now inside of the storage section, you can find the local storage. You need to expand it. And then you will find the local storage for the local host that we have. So here you can find the key, merge pet key, and the value. So this is our JSON string that we saved. If I click it, you can see what this string contains. Here you see the best level, currency counter. Also you see our board. If we expand our board, you can find that on one cell, in this case, on the cell with ID 13, we have our pet data. Now, if I refresh the page, you see that our counter have been decreased. But if we check our local storage again, you will see that here we store 1000 currency. So it means that currently we can write the function for loading this data, and then we will be able to restore our state. So for the load function, let's go through all the sections again. In the game data, we will not write anything. Then we have the HTML elements. So here, let's access our load button. Now let's find this ID in the HTML. Here I can find the button with ID load button. Let's copy and paste it inside of our function. Then in the helper section, we will not add anything. Let's go to our core action section. Here, right after our save function, let's write a new function load. Now we need to do the same steps in the reverse order. So at first, let's access the data from the local storage. For that, I will use the method getItem. So this method expects one parameter, which is the key. So let's pass the saving key. And now this line will return our data JSON. So let's store it in the variable. And now we need to get our data from the data JSON. For that, we will use the json.parse function. Now we extracted the same data as in our save function. And now we need to use it to rewrite the global variables. So these variables we will rewrite, but we have one problem with the variable board. I can't rewrite it because we are using the const keyword. The proper way is when you remain the const keyword and then you write a for loop for replacing all the data inside of the board. But we will use the easiest way. So let's change the const keyword to the let keyword. And now it means that we can reassign our board. So inside of the load function, let's reassign all our global variables. And after we updated our global variables, we actually want to see these changes on our page. So it means that we need to call the update UI and the render functions. And after that, let's add a new alert message that the game is loaded. So now let's go to the trigger section, and here let's add a new trigger to our load button. So now let's test how it works. In the local storage, you have the previous saving with 1000 currency. So let's click the load button. Now I see the message that the game is loaded, and if I click OK, you see that we restored our game state. But actually, the load function is a little bit more tricky, because what if user clicks load button before it made any changes? So let's go to our local storage, and here let's delete this saving. And now let's try to load our game state. If I click this button, you don't see any changes on our page, but also you don't see the message that the game is loaded. So it means that we have some kind of error. Let's open our console, and here you can see that we have the type error because we can't read the property board of the null. So actually what happens? The data JSON is trying to access the item with the saving key, but we don't have this item in the local storage. So it means that the value of this line will be null or undefined. Then we are trying to parse the null value. In this case, we will anyway get the null or undefined. So json.parse can parse other data types types, not only strings, but in this case, it will return the initial state. And then we have the line where we reassign our board to data.board. So this is the same as writing null.board, but null doesn't contain any board. So this is the reason why we have this error. So let's write a new validation that if our data is equal to null or undefined, it means that we don't have any savings yet. So it means that we shouldn't execute our load function. And now let's test how it works. I don't have any savings in the local storage. Let's click the load button. And now you see the message that no savings yet. And then nothing changed. Now I can say that our function works correctly. So now let's write the last function for the reset. Let's go through all the sections again. So in the game data, we don't need to change anything. Then we have the HTML elements. Let's access our reset button. In the index.html, I can find this ID reset button. So let's copy and paste it. So then I have the helper section. I don't need to add any functions there. Let's go inside of our core action section. And here, right after our load function, let's add a new function reset. So actually, this function does the same as when we refresh our page, but also I want to delete our saving when we click the reset button, because currently we don't have any way for deleting our saving. So the proper way would be to reassign all these variables to the initial value. But actually, there is one trick that we can use. So there is a function location.reload, and if you read the description of this function, you will see that this function like refresh button. So this is kind of tricky way how we can reset our game without reassigning our variables. And then after that, let's also delete our local storage saving. So inside of the local storage object, I have two methods that we can use. So the first method is clear. So this method clears all the keys that we store in the local storage. So currently we use only one key, and this perfectly suits for our case. But there is one problem. If in the future you will add more keys, you can forget that in the reset button, you use clear function that removes all of them. So and this is the reason why I prefer another function. Local storage object also has the function remove item. So in here we need to pass our key, and then this function will remove this key value pair from our local storage. So let's pass our saving key here. And now we know that reset function will delete only our key. So it means that if in the future I will add more keys, I will not have unexpected behavior. Also, we can write the message that the game is reset. Then I don't even need to add update UI or render functions, and this is because we have the section game start where we call all these functions. So when we use location.reload, we refresh the page, and it means that we recreate all this code from the beginning. So we call the game start functions also. So I think that the reset function is finished. Now let's add a new trigger to the reset button. And now let's test how it works. So at first, let's save our game state. I see the message that the game is saved. Now let's buy many animals. Now let's load our game state. I see the message that game is loaded, and now I see that we have our game state. Now let's reset our game. I see the message that game is reset, and now let's try to load our game again, and I see the message that no savings yet. So it means that all these functions work correctly. There's one problem with save and load functions that you need to be aware of. Currently, we recreate our data object based on all the global variables that we have. But what happens when we add a new global variable? So for example, I add a new global variable clicks. Now, to save my clicks, I need to change the save and load functions. So inside of the save function, I need to manually add a new global variable. And then I also need to go to the load function, and here I need to add a new variable to reassign. So actually, when we add new variables, we don't want to rewrite our functions. So and we have this problem because initially we chose the wrong way of saving our data. So let's remove these changes. And here in the save function, you see, we recreate this data object. So actually, from the beginning, we can save all the data inside of this object. So it means that in the game data section, instead of saving all our data into separate variables, we can create one variable data. and now we can store all our data inside of this variable. So for example, I store our board and poop. Actually, we can store all the data here, and then we can use only this variable data inside of all other functions. So for example, we have the function increase poop inside of the helper section, and here, instead of increasing the poop directly, we increase the poop inside of the data object. So currently I undo these changes, and this is because we have a long project with more than 200 JavaScript lines. So it means that if we recreate our global variables inside of the one object, we will need to refactor very a lot of lines. I don't want to spend your time on this. I consciously used the way of storing all the data in separate variables because this is a natural way how you store your variables. But currently, this is important that you know the problem that many functions needs to access these global variables, and it means that if you add a new variable, you will need to rewrite your functions. For preventing this logical error, in your future projects, store all your global data inside of the object. So we almost finished our game. Only one button that still doesn't work is the auto clicker. So currently I can't buy it. So in the next video, we will implement the auto clicker button and we will finish our game project.